They are called the laws of war, a code built over centuries, written in treaties like Geneva, meant to govern the worst of human conflict. A simple promise that even when fighting for life, honor would be maintained. But history shows that when the lines of battle blur, when hate is the driving force, honor often dies first. And no chapter reveals this dark truth better than the brutal, relentless interrogation of American POWs during the Vietnam War. In the popular imagination, the Vietnam War is fought in jungles and rice paddies. But for hundreds of American servicemen, pilots, navigators, and aircrew, the true war began the moment their parachutes hit the ground or their planes were shot from the sky. They were instantly stripped of their status as soldiers and subjected to an institutionalized campaign of psychological and physical torture. Their journey led to a place whose name is synonymous with cruelty, the Hanoi Hilton. This is our thesis. The North Vietnamese interrogation system was designed not merely to extract information, but to shatter the moral and psychological foundation of the American fighting man. It was a war crime executed on an industrial scale, and the survival of these men became an incredible story of defiance, the will to resist against a system designed for total surrender. A man like Navy Lieutenant Commander Jeremiah Denton, shot down in 1965, the moment of capture was disorienting. From the cockpit of a multi-million-dollar jet to the hands of an angry mob. But the mob was just the prelude. The true enemy wore a uniform and carried a clipboard. Upon arrival, the system was simple: isolation and degradation. Stripped of identity, often given a number, crammed into tiny cells, the cubicles. The goal was to remove all familiar external supports, the rank, the uniform, the sense of self. It was a calculated clinical approach to breaking a man's spirit before breaking his body. But a few saw the long game. One figure, perhaps more prophetic than any, was Vice Admiral James Stockdale. Shot down later in 1965, he was immediately an influential figure. Stockdale understood that the Vietnamese were playing a psychological war, seeking propaganda victories, forced confessions, anti-war statements, and false moral condemnation of the American war effort. Stockdale foresaw the moral collapse that could happen if men were left to their own devices. His thesis became the antithesis to the North Vietnamese system. The code. He helped establish a secret system of tapping and hand signals. The tap code, a lifeline of communication, and leadership that ran like a hidden current beneath the prison floors. The POW interrogations were not slick, modern affairs. They were blunt instruments, rope bindings, leg irons, long periods of standing, starvation, and the infamous straps, torture where a man was bound and twisted into agonizing positions. The objective was the statement, a signature on a piece of paper, a public recording denouncing America. This is where the resilience ignited. When Commander Denton was paraded on camera, his jailers expected a broken, pliable man. Instead, he delivered a silent, defiant message. While appearing to cooperate, he blinked his eyes in Morse code, spelling out the word torture. It was a small, silent act, a flicker of light in absolute darkness. It told the world the truth, but it came at a monumental cost to Denton himself. For the North Vietnamese, this defiance was an affront. The screw was about to turn tighter. The prisoners, led by men like Stockdale, had chosen their line. No signature, no surrender. But how do you hold that line when every minute is a slow, agonizing death? The enemy had been outmaneuvered. Jeremiah Denton's blinking message had broadcast the ugly truth about their humane treatment. For the North Vietnamese guards, or the Kim Sat, it was a deep loss of face. The immediate response? A terrifying escalation. The prisoners, or uncooperative elements, were moved to the Heartbreak Hotel and other specialized camps designed for maximum isolation and pain. The goal shifted from simple intelligence gathering to systematic moral extermination. The interrogators now hunted for the secret leadership structure they knew existed. This new phase of torture wasn't just physical. It was psychological warfare. Men were held in pitch-black solitary confinement for months, sometimes years, with barely enough water and food to survive. The mind, starved of sensory input, becomes its own worst torturer, filling the silence with phantom noises and crushing despair. The central question of the prison became, how much pain is required for a lie? The interrogators wanted the statement, an admission of guilt, a denouncement of America. In 1967, one pivotal act would galvanize the entire POW community and create the legend of the resistance. The Vietnamese demanded that the senior ranking officer, James Stockdale, appear at a massive press conference to publicly condemn the U.S. bombing campaign. To the captors, this was the ultimate propaganda coup. To Stockdale, it was the final ethical battle. If he broke, the entire chain of command and morale would follow. Stockdale knew he could not allow a forced confession. His response was one of radical defiance. He smashed a stool over his own head, severely gashing his forehead, and then slit his wrists with a piece of broken glass. He was choosing catastrophe over collaboration. The Vietnamese were left with a bleeding, nearly unconscious man who was utterly unusable for propaganda. This moment was the catalytic event. It sent an unequivocal signal through the prison walls via the TAP code. The code of conduct holds. We fight back, even if it costs our lives. The TAP code, that simple 5x5 matrix, was the greatest counterweapon. It allowed information about torture methods, food distribution, new arrivals, and most crucially, leadership orders to flow. It was the antithesis of their isolation policy. Yet the code also brought internal disputes. What was the right line between resistance and survival? Some argued for giving minor information, a fake name, a past address, to avoid immediate death. Others, like Stockdale, enforced a strict no-cooperation policy. One common torture method used to break the code was to bring two friends together. Torture one and promise the other a break if he simply confessed his friend's minor TAP code infraction. This created a profound moral trap. Obedience to the enemy in order to save a friend. The battle was now not external, but internal. It was a war fought in the dark corners of the mind, where hours stretched into weeks and weeks into years. The resilience was cemented, but the human cost was staggering. We've seen the code. Now, we must look deeper at the men who broke, the men who held, and the psychological scars that defined the rest of their lives. For years, the war continued to rage, not just outside the walls, but within the minds of the men in the Hanoi Hilton. They had established their rules of defiance. Now they had to live them. The daily battle shifted from resisting one interrogation to surviving the next 1,000 days of isolation. The torture was never just about breaking bones. It was about erasing the future. The interrogators would whisper calculated psychological attacks. Your country has forgotten you. Your wife is with another man. The most insidious torture was the uncertainty. They had no idea if the war was still on, if their letters were getting through, or if they would ever be released. To fight the decay of the mind, the prisoners, often alone, created rituals. Men like John McCain would mentally recite the names of every high school classmate, every play he ever saw. They exercised in total darkness. They communicated using a sweep signal when the guards were near, indicating it was safe to resume tapping. These small acts were radical affirmations of identity. The system was designed for 100% success, and some men did break. Under unimaginable duress, they signed statements. When they returned to the collective, these men faced the deep internal conflict of guilt and failure. Men like Stockdale enforced a strict code, but they also understood the power of the will to survive. The complexity lay in the difference between breaking and collaborating. Collaboration was defined by intent. Did the statement cause harm or provide meaningful information? Most often, the statements extracted were useless propaganda designed to embarrass. The prisoners were masters of giving just enough to stop the torture without giving anything of value, an art known as the song and dance. This internal ethical dispute became the defining moral ambiguity of the entire experience. Then, silence. In January 1973, the Paris Peace Accords were signed. The TAPs stopped being orders and survival tips and became a wave of unbelievable news. They were going home. Operation Homecoming was an immediate, organized repatriation effort. The footage of the first prisoners descending the ramps of the C-141 Starlifters is one of the most emotional and iconic moments in American history. These men, starved, scarred, but unbowed, were met by a country that had largely lost faith in the war they had fought. The image of Jeremiah Denton, stepping off the plane, still struggling with his eyes due to the lack of light, saying, "We are honored to have had the opportunity to serve our country," became the enduring symbol of their resilience. The war crimes committed by the North Vietnamese were never fully prosecuted. But the lessons of the POW experience reverberated through the U.S. military. It led to a profound rethinking of survival training and the code of conduct. These men defined a new form of courage, not fighting the enemy, but resisting the surrender of the self. They proved that the ultimate weapon against totalitarian cruelty is the unbreakable connection between free men. The fight against psychological warfare didn't end in Hanoi. The legacy of their resistance continues to shape how military forces and special operations personnel are trained to survive extreme duress. If you want to dive deeper into the tactics of extreme survival and the psychological profile of the elite warrior, click on our next video.